Okay, so now in this video, I'm going to show you how you actually use Biomart. So as I mentioned, it's up in the top blue bar. So we'll click on Biomart. And this opens up the Biomart interface. And as I said before, the first thing I need to do is choose my database. So I select Choose Database, and I'm looking at genes. I'm looking at human genes. Having selected my database, I now get given the options of selecting my filters and attributes. Because the filters and attributes are different for each database, you can't get them until you've done that. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my filters. To me, this is the logical order, is to go filters, then attributes first, but actually you can do things in any order and you can go back and change things as you go. And I'm going to open up Gene, and I'm going to go to this Input External References ID list, and I'm going to paste in my list of identifiers. I've put them in as comma separated, but you can put them in tab separated, carriage return separated. Any normal way that you would ever separate a list probably works. And one way I can check whether my query has worked, has been sensible, is I can hit count up here. So when I hit count, I've got 0. So that means I've done something wrong. So if I look at this query here, and I look at this bit above, the drop down is actually saying that it's looking for ensemble gene IDs, these ENSGs, which is not what I've put in. So I'm going to open up this drop down, and I'm going to select gene names, because that's what I've put in. If I now do my count, 6 out of 64,561. Just to point out, I am actually recording this using Ensemble 93, whereas when you do your course, you'll be doing 94, so you might get, the total number of genes might be different. I don't imagine you'll get anything other than 6, but this 64,000 might be different. So that's worked. That's tell me everything is fine. I've found all my genes. Now I want to work out what I'm going to print in my table. So I'm going to go into attributes here on the left. And I'm going to open up, I've got these 6 categories, which are actually mutually exclusive. And so most of the things I want, my NTBI ID, my Go terms, these are found in this features section. But my cDNA sequence is found in sequences. I'm actually going to have to do 2 separate queries. So within features, I'm now going to open up this gene section, where I will find the gene name. So that was my initial input. You can see it's already selected the gene stable ID and the transcript stable ID as defaults. And now I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to open up external. The next thing I want is my NCBI ID. So this is in my list of external references, and they're in alphabetical order. So it's here on the right. And above it, I've got my Go terms. So I'm going to select accession, name, and definition. Now I'm going to hit results, and it generates a preview table for me. So this table is only 10 lines long, and you can see a lot of these are links that I can click on, which is useful. I've got my stable ID, my gene name, my NTBI ID, and my Go term, accession, name, and definition. It's only showing me the first 10 lines. So if I want to see the whole thing, I can say View All, and it opens me up a new tab with an HTML table. It does generally take a little bit of time to load. The logic behind doing it this way is when you're doing a really big query, if you do a query that's got 100,000 lines, that takes its time to load for you. And because it takes its time, if you make a mistake, if you discover that you really needed the Go term name and you'd forgotten to select it as an attribute, you've wasted quite a lot of time by loading a 100,000 line table. If you just load 10 lines and then discover it, you've saved yourself quite a bit of time. You can easily just hop back and say, oh, I'll just hop back into my attributes and fix this. I can also export the data as a file. I have different options of the types of file, and I can get a compressed web file notified by email. So if you've got a really large query and your connection is not great, this is usually the best way to do it, the compressed web file, because that means that our database doesn't need to communicate with your computer all the way through. It does all its thing by itself and then it sends it to you. Whereas if you're getting it as just a file, it's kind of building it as it's sending it. So you may lose part of your data if you lose connection. So anything big, I do recommend this compressed web file. So we haven't got our cDNA sequences. So I'm going to go back into the attributes in order to find those. So I go to attributes and I go back to these 6 categories, and I'm going to open up sequences now. And if I expand this, you'll see that I've currently selected peptide sequence, and it gives me a little graphic which highlights which part of the sequence I've actually selected. So I'm going to pick cDNA sequence, but the graphic can be really useful if you're a bit unsure of the difference between things like cDNA encoding sequence or the flanks, particularly which bit it's actually going to pick with the flanks. And I'm also going to open up the header information and select my gene name again. And now when I go to results, I get FASTA sequence instead. So you've now got an exercise that's looking at using Biomarked, and so you've got some queries to do there. Please do have an explore of the filters and the attributes. There is a lot in there that won't be covered in the exercise, so I do recommend having a good look around to see if there's anything that might be useful to you. So thank you very much for watching these videos. I, or possibly one of my colleagues, will be along for the Q&A that starts in the last hour of